The last method of looping in PHP is by the use of the Foreach statement. On the right hand side, we're still on the for. On the right hand side, you can either type in the search Foreach or simply click Foreach on the right hand side. And what we get here is the specification for the Foreach language construct. The Foreach construct provides an easy, and by the way, I was calling these obviously functions. Again, these are language constructs. They are not functions. The Foreach construct provides an easy way to iterate over arrays. Foreach works only on arrays and objects and will issue an error when you try to use it with a variable with a different data type or an uninitialized variable. There are two syntaxes. And there we go. We've got Foreach, then we have array expression, which is basically the array we are passing through, and then s value, and then we have a statement in between the brackets. And then the other one is Foreach same array with s key equals value, basically. In which case we will get the key and the value rather than just the value of the array. And then obviously statement again between the brackets. So if we're using the alternate version, obviously you can have a colon and then end for each as well. With first a form loop loops over the array given by array expression. On each iteration, the value of the current element is assigned to value, and the internal array pointer is advanced by 1. So on the next iteration, you'll be looking at the next element. The second form will additionally assign the current element's key to the key variable on each iteration. So basically, if you only need values from the array, use this first one. If you also need keys associated with those values, then use this syntax, basically array s key equals value. And this is obviously equals plus this angle, right angle bracket. And then it is possible to customize object iteration. We're not worried about the objects yet. Then we have a note in PHP 5, when Foreach first starts executing, the internal array pointer is automatically reset to the first element of the array. This means that you do not need to call reset before a for each loop. And that's a great news, because obviously what happens if you want to run for each twice on the same array, you don't have to call this reset as we had to do with while and do while. You can loop straight away using this for each, and before it starts executing, first this array gets reset basically, and its internal pointer which will point straight away to the first item. As Foreach relies on the internal array pointer in PHP 5, changing it within the loop may load to unexpected behavior. So don't mess with the array within the loop, basically. Don't try and change the internal pointer, because there are ways of doing this as well. And in PHP 7, Foreach does not use the internal array pointer. So that's another thing to remember. PHP 7 at the moment is just in beta, but obviously by the time when you're watching this, it might be already in a stable version, so you might as well use it when you get a chance. Okay, let's now move to the editor and start experimenting with it. We're going to start with the array. So array variable, you can obviously call it, give it any other name if you want to, but I'm just going to call it array. And I'm going to create an associative array. So I'm going to specify the keys for my items. First one will be A, and its value will be apple. Second one will be B for banana. And the last one will be P for peach. So peach, there we go. So this is our array. What I'm going to do now is use this for each statement and then loop through this array as value. Value, there we go. Okay, set of curly brackets and then echo value and new line. So we've got it all nicely, each item on a new line. Now if we save it, preview it in a browser, refresh the page, and there we go, apple, banana, peach. But we obviously can't see the keys. This is because we've used this first statement, so we only have access to the value. Now, if we want to have access to the keys as well, let's use the keys, let's key equals value. But I see the syntax that we're using in the array as well as the assignment. So we have key and a value on the right hand side. So now we also have access to the key. So what I'm going to do is actually echo everything on one line. I'm going to use key, then comma, because we're using echo statement, we can separate all these items by comma, then space, comma, and then the value. You can do it either this way, or you can concatenate it with a full stop rather than commas. But because we are using echo statement, we can use just commas and separate all these obviously after the comma. So if we save it and preview it in a browser, refresh the page, and there we go, A, apple, B, banana, P, peach. So now we have access to the keys as well as the values. Now let's try and use this for each statement right after this first one. So we're running the same thing twice just to check if this reset actually works. So we don't have to call any reset apparently. The array, internal pointer of this array will automatically be reset after each, basically before each statement, is called. So if we refresh the page and there we go, it works. So we don't have to use this reset as we did with while and do while. Okay, what I'm going to do now is remove this second one, and what I'm going to do is print let's wrap it with these pre-tags, then print R, put our array here, and then echo statement closing pre-tag, so our code is nicely formatted. So if I save it, preview it in a browser, refresh the page, so you can see our array is now obviously displayed in a browser as well. Let's quickly go back to the editor. What I want to do is modify these values of the original array. So what I'm going to do is use the value with the reference. So I'm putting this and symbol here, which means I have access to the original value inside of this array. So what I'm going to do is, rather than echoing this here, what I'm going to do is use the switch statement inside of this for each loop. So switch, and then I'm passing the key because I want to check what key is basically the given iteration referring to. And I'm going to use case for A. What I want to do is set the value, the original value, to first, and then break statement. If it's obviously A, we're breaking. And then for case B, what I want the value to be, I would like the value to be second, and then break. And then we go for the next iteration, obviously. And then case C, I want to set it to third. And then, sorry, wrong. Obviously colon, then value. We're associating this value with this variable value. And then the break. Okay, now what I'm going to do is copy this entire echo print R statement and save everything, obviously paste it underneath and save everything and preview it in the browser. Refresh the page, and there we go. So now we've replaced these values with the new ones by simply using this reference within the for each statement. By using the reference, if I was to remove this, nothing's going to change because we haven't got access to the actual value, the original value in the array. We only pass the variable which has the certain value associated, but we cannot overwrite it. It's only by the reference that we actually have access to this functionality. So if we have it as a reference, now we have access to the original array and we can overwrite whatever values are associated with the given item in the array. Now this, however, only works with the values. If I try and do the same for the key, if I just put the reference for the key, and then if we preview everything in a browser, refresh the page, as you can see, we've got this fatal error. Key element cannot be a reference, so it's only working with the value. So don't try the same thing on the keys. Okay, another thing I wanted to show you is the fact that when we are actually working with the for each statement, you can see we've got this switch inside of the for each, and we're using this break. As you may remember, inside of the previous statement, when we were working with the for loop, this break actually terminated the iteration, the whole basically loop itself. But because this statement is wrapped with the switch statement, it only breaks the switch. So basically we're iterating, we're going through the switch, the key has been matched, the case is matched basically against the value passed as an argument to the switch statement, and then it breaks the switch, and then it goes to the end of the switch because the switch has been obviously terminated, and it goes to the next loop, and then we check in again. If it's been found, it breaks the switch, goes outside of the switch, goes to the next iteration of the for each statement. If this break was outside of the switch, then it is when the for each statement would actually be terminated. But we will discuss this in the next video. Now let's remove a bit of this code. Let's remove this echo statement. Let's remove what we've got inside of the for each statement and what we have after. And we're still keeping our array. And what I'm going to do now is I want to show you another thing. So if I just simply echo value and then the new line, basically by using this BR tag. What's going to happen when the execution of this for each statement ends? And let's, rather than having this as a reference, let's just make it a normal standard variable. What happens at the end of the statement is that the key, the last key and value, is available outside of the for each statement. So if I now want to echo key and concatenate this, I'll just use the comma, concatenate it with comma again, value. And by concatenating, I mean I'm just basically passing 3 different elements to the echo statements, because obviously with echo we can separate them by comma rather than having them all on one line, on new line basically. So if I now save it and preview it in the browser, refresh the page, and as you can see, the last item, obviously iteration is here, we only echoing the value from the array, but as you can see, this last statement that I've written in this file after the for each loop still return the right value, the last key and value basically from the array. So in order to make sure that it's not available outside of the for each loop, what we need to do is basically unset it. So if I simply use unset, and we can separate the values basically that we want to unset by comma as well, so key, and I want to unset the value. So if I now try to do the same, if I just copy this entire echo statement after this unset call, if we go back, refresh the page, now you can see undefined variable key and undefined variable value. So if I was to remove the first one and try to echo straight after I've unset them after this for each loop, refresh the page, we're not gonna see the previous one, obviously, because we've removed the statement and now we haven't got access to the last key and value from this for each statement. So if you need to make sure that obviously nothing can access the key and value from the array after the loop using the for each, make sure that right after you just unset the last key and value. I'm now going to show you the situation where unsetting the for each variable actually matters, because most of the time you won't really need to do it, but there are situations, and this is going to be the one of them, where unsetting of the variable after the for each statement is quite essential. I'm going to start with the array 1, and I just associate an array with this variable with 3 integers, 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to duplicate this array and rename it to array 2 with values 4, 5, and 6. And now what I'm going to do is simply use the for each loop. I'll put the array 1 to it as, and I'm going to use the value as reference. So end symbol before the value. And again, you can name it whatever you want. Value is just most kind of common way of basically for each loop, but you can call it, say, item or whatever you want. So we are going to stick with value for now. I'm going to use simple echo statement. Again, we are echoing these values to the browser, and then echo br to make sure it's all on the new line. So that's one thing. If we go to the browser, refresh the page, we have 1, 2, 3, as you would expect. Now if you go back, and I'm going to copy this entire for each statement, paste it underneath. This time we are looking over the array 2 without using the reference. So if I save it, preview it in the browser, 4, 5, 6, all good. Okay, let's now go and echo an item at index 2, which would be the 3 integer because it's 0, 1, and 2, from the array 1. So I'm going to use array 1 with index 2. And now what do you think we are going to get? You would think probably that we're going to get number 3, but let's see what it's actually going to return in the browser. So if we refresh the page, and we get 6, which we know for sure is not inside of the array 1, is inside of the array 2. Now why did it happen? It happened because we are using the same name for S statement. We are using value in the first one and value in the second one. And this value uses the reference. What that means means that we still have access to this value here at the end of this statement. And the last item, because the value is available outside of the for each statement, overrides the value, the last value of this first array, this first for each statement. So in order to avoid this sort of situation, and just before I actually do anything, what I'm going to do as well is print R so we can see exactly what this array is containing. It's only the last item that's affected. So array 1, if we save it and preview it in the browser, refresh the page, you can see 0, For index 0 we have 1, for index 1 we have 2, and for index 2 we have 6. So it's overwritten the last item by running this last for each statement here. We have two options now. What can we do is to either rename this to say item, and if we do it this way, and I just echo item rather than value, or call it whatever else you want, just make sure that it's not called the same way. If I refresh the page, now it's all the same. So you've got 1, 2, and 3 as it should be. So this is one of the ways of doing it. So if I just put it back to what it was, or simply unset the value right after the first for each statement when we are using this reference here. So unset, and we use this value, and now we can use another for each statement with the same variable name. So if I save it, preview it in the browser, you can see it stays the same. So it's 1, 2, and 3. And if we try and retrieve the item from the array directly, so echo array 1 at index 2, it is still going to give us 3. So now it works. But otherwise, obviously, if you don't use this unset, or if you use the same name for the variable within the S statement of the for each loop, then obviously this last one will be overwritten. Now let's try and loop through the array of arrays. Array equals array, and inside of this array, each item of this array will be an array itself. So we are going to start with the first one, which will have apple as the first value, then second value will be banana, and the third value will be peach. And then we create another array, and I'm just going to simply duplicate this line and replace apple with orange. Then banana is going to be replaced with nectarine, and peach is going to be replaced with, say, mango. So now we have two items in the main array, which are also arrays, and each of them has 3 items in it. Okay, now I'm going to do the for each statement, and I'm starting with array as say item, and what we can do now is do another for each inside of it for each item as say value. And now I'm going to simply echo, actually outside of this one, let's for each item, for each of those embedded arrays, let's create separate unordered lists. So echo, we start with the UL tag and then closing UL tag after each one as well. So closing UL tag, and then each bullet point start with li, then echo value and echo closing li. If we save it, preview it in the browser, refresh the page, and there we go. We have 2 unordered lists. First one is for the first array, second one is for the second array. Both of them obviously embedded in the main array. And that's all good, but as of PHP 5.5, we can do it in slightly easier way. Now we can do it so that we are looping through these arrays. Obviously, each of these embedded arrays is now represented as an item. So what we can do is extract these values to separate variables using the list language construct. So what I'm going to do is the first item, the apple, will be represented by a variable A. Second one, banana, will be variable B. And third one, peach, will be variable C. Obviously, these will also apply with the second iteration, will apply to these items as well. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to remove this internal for each statement. And what we are going to do is to use these variable names. So A for the first one. What I'm going to do now is copy this entire block, paste it underneath, replace the variable, rename it from A to B, and the last one to C. So basically what it does, with one for each statement, we have access to the internal arrays, array values, basically by using this list language construct. So if we save it and preview everything in your browser, you see it's exactly the same. It's just the syntax a little bit clearer. Now, one problem with this is that if we have more than 3 items, and obviously very often you may not know how many items are there if you are fetching data from a database, from any flat file or anything like this, in which case you have to be careful. Obviously, this all will only pretty much come useful if you know how many items you have in the array. You can obviously count on them and then just randomly generate these variables, but I would personally use it probably with smaller collections when I know exactly how many items there are, just to make sure that we're not overcomplicating things really. But let's have a look at what's going to happen if I try and add another variable, which we know there are only 3 items in each of these arrays, and if I try and do cd variable, If I save it, preview it in the browser, refresh the page, and there we go. We get undefined offset 3. Because obviously this item does not exist. These arrays are only 3 items long, not 4, so this one will never exist. We can, however, use less than there are items in the array, and that's going to work. Obviously, because we are echoing this one, that will still cause a problem. So if I refresh the page, it tells us that variable C doesn't exist, because obviously we haven't really defined that, we haven't declared that we want to actually use it. So now we would have to remove this one. But if we use the number of variables, the variables which are available within this list statement here, inside of the statement for the for each loop, then obviously that's going to work just fine. It's just when we are actually trying to use more variables, declare more variables than there are items in the array, in the internal array, or trying to use the variable which actually hasn't been declared within this list, statement here. One last thing I wanted to show is the alternative syntax that we can use actually basically rather than brackets, and the same way as with the other loops as well, we can use for each colon at the end of this line, and then simply end for each this way, and semicolon, and that's going to work just fine as well. If we preview everything in the browser, it works exactly the same way. So whichever one you prefer. However, brackets is pretty much the most common one for any of these 4 loops that we've discussed in this chapter.